Let me start with this premise. If you were in a conversation with someone about Valve's impact on the gaming landscape, what would be your first thought? Now, Valve's influence on how games are made today is something that you're at least a little aware of. There are already plenty of explanations out there as to why Valve's games and softwares have pushed the evolution of video games to extreme heights. So we could sit here and talk about how Half-Life fundamentally changed how narratives are given in action games, or how the Source engine revolutionized real-time physics in a virtual environment and stuff like that, but I never hear people talk about Valve's impact on other third-party titles. The Source engine is a very hands-off program, so it's fairly easy to mess around in. Valve has historically been very generous with the software development kits it allows to be used publicly, and this is why Source mods and even full-on productions can be made off the basis of games like Half-Life 2 or Team Fortress 2. But although these are stories in and of themselves, it's not the focal point of this video. For what we will be talking about is a bond that has been going on for as long as I can remember, but no one really takes the time to think about it. So, we are going to try to answer a very important question. How the hell did a point-and-click game from 2014 become so interchangeable with a 3D engine from 2004? Five Nights at Freddy's and the Source engine, a bond as old as time. One that boomed the Source Filmmaker community to astronomical heights, as well as being heavily associated with games like Garry's mod. It's something that we're all aware of. Most of you have probably seen a FNaF SFM animation in your lifetime, or messed around with FNaF-related Gmod workshop items. Now, in a lot of ways, this relationship makes a ton of sense. Source, at the time, was one of the most versatile gaming and animation tools out there, and since the Five Nights at Freddy's games never had their models or characters ever formally released, the community used their limitations to create some of the first pieces of FNaF fan-made content. So now, even though that we have context, I still don't really feel that most of the fan base fully grasps how associated this engine is with these games, even though it's been right in our faces for years. So this makes me prop up the question, how did this all start? Well, the answer is a little complicated. Tracking down the first piece of FNaF Source content is a little tricky. The very first piece of Five Nights at Freddy's related SFM I can find dates back all the way to August 24th, 2014, with the video Five Nights at NG's. And for what it's worth, being the very first FNaF SFM video, it's still pretty solid today. The video doesn't use any FNaF related models, instead relying on the robots from TF2's Man vs. Machine mode to represent the animatronics as it hunts down our protagonist on 2 Fort. The end being a replication of the Power Out segment from FNaF 1. For being a Source Filmmaker video uploaded only a mere 16 days after the launch of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game, I definitely expected much worse. The lighting of the intelligence room is actually really good for what it is, and it gives off a very nice looking nighttime setting for the map. I think a big reason as to why this animation holds up better than most early FNaF SFMs is because it doesn't really have to worry about using any heavily inaccurate models that were created and popularized in the early days of the series. But speaking of which, now, finding the exact date of the very first fan-made FNaF model is pretty complicated. Undeniably, the first known fan-created model for the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Crew were the models created by i6NIS, but exactly when they were uploaded is a little hard to calculate. The earliest any sort of FNaF-related model entered the Steam Workshop was a re-upload of the i6NIS models to Garry's mod on September 8th, 2014, a fairly long stretch of time since FNaF 1 came out, about a month after. Since this is a re-upload, tracking down the absolute origins of these models started to become a bit more tricky, but I did finally find what I consider to be the absolute origin of these models. After some digging, I found that i6NIS has a Sketchfab page. If you are unaware, Sketchfab is a website primarily used for the sharing and purchasing of 3D models. Here, we can find several of their Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and 2 models, but for the sake of this segment, we are only going to focus on the ones for FNaF 1. The first model released in this batch was Foxy, releasing on August 21st, 2014, 3 days before what I could find as the first ever FNaF SFM. As time went on, more models will be uploaded in the coming week, including Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy Fazbear. For what it's worth, these models aren't half bad for being made in the time span of less than 16 days. Of course, these models are terribly inaccurate nowadays, but I have a feeling that we could have certainly had worse. Looking at it now, these models have been completely phased out by others with much more accurate sculpts and textures. teenagers. Now, the only time you ever see people using these models are from people reminiscing on their childhood, or who are currently using them for pure evil. So now that we know the model's origins, what were they initially used for? Well, we can find that exact information on the Garry's Mod Steam Workshop page, turning the models into player models. These are the Five Nights at Freddy's models that i6NIS made for Slender Fortress. To talk about the history of FNaF and Source, we kinda need to take a detour so I can briefly tell you all about an ancient TF2 game mode called Slender Fortress. This game mode has a whole history in and of itself that is pretty interesting. After the rise in popularity of the Slender the 8 Pages game, a coder named Kit O'Rifty, along with the help of mapper Glubbable, would create a reconstruction of the Slender the 8 Pages game with new maps, some new gameplay ideas, and most importantly, new monsters. The game mode also gave special perks and advantages to all 9 of the mercenaries to better optimize the playing experience for the game mode. It was a super creative idea that looked incredibly fun to play. Alas though, I don't think I can realistically play this game mode properly. So the game mode was fairly popular back in the day, its peak seeming to be around the 2013 mark, before our point of interest was even created. So I tried to play Slender Fortress and encounter these models. Unfortunately, it seems like every server running the Five Nights at Freddy's maps and models has since been shut down. I scoured high and low looking for one last server that may be hosting these assets, but alas, I could unfortunately find nothing. Only very few Slender Fortress servers remain up today, none of them seeming to have the maps 5 rounds at Freddy's or the Return to Freddy's in rotation. But what is fortunate is that there are still plenty of videos still up to date documenting what these servers used to be like. And honestly, jank aside, it still looks like a lot of fun. I really hope in the future these servers start to get more populated again. I'd love to play on them more. Since we couldn't play the actual game mode, I got some buddies with me to reenact how the game mode could have possibly gone inside Garry's mod. This was the result.
Alright, 3, 2, 1. Freddy Fazbear!
I am dead.
That's Splink. Oh no, that's Splinks.
What?
It's Freddy!
Oh no,
Chica the chicken.
Foxy? Oh no! Wanna know who else spawns Foxy?
My
Foxy,
get ready. Hey, bam!
Oh no, Foxy.
Pro tip, do not hit Golden Freddy.
Golden Freddy is just a chroma keyed version of Freddy Fazbear jump scare.
Can we use weapons to make this a little more interesting and try to kill them?
You can't. I tried stabbing Freddy. It didn't work.
Well, you're not gonna kill Freddy with a single stab.
You hop with a semi-automatic assault rifle.
It's all falling apart.
Yeah.
Oh, Freddy Fazbear.
Like the one that's like a custom pizzeria. Why are you lighting me on fire?
I'm lighting Foxy on fire.
That's me!
Oh,
No,
no,
it's
Foxy
Foxy.
the pirate.
Trust me, I get it. Dags
I killed him!
look very similar. They both have like really
Wait, you're
long
Foxy?
hair.
Foxy now.
Am I Foxy?
It's,
No, you're not
I
Foxy.
just burned Foxy to death and it said that
Pringle's
Dags died.
gaslighting you.
We need someone on the show stage.
Very slowly.
Die, Bonnie.
I hope that was a good enough replacement. Speaking of Garry's mod though, FNaF and Garry's mod. If there was any game that wasn't another FNaF game that you could associate the series to, it'd be Gmod. This game has such a rich history of its own, one that I went into detail with a while back. What we need to focus on though is obviously the time frame of when FNaF started to integrate with Garry's mod. If we try to track down the first FNaF related add-on added to the game, we will find a catapult named the FNaF Catapult, which was uploaded on September 2nd, 2013. I'm just messing around. The first FNaF-related Gmod item to be uploaded to the Steam Workshop was a recreation of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza map in the Source engine. Now, I know that I said earlier that the first time we've seen the i6NIS models in action outside of Slender Fortress was the player models, but this map would be the first thing uploaded that would be FNaF-related on the Steam Workshop, beating the player models by a huge 22 days, more than half a month. Now, that doesn't sound like a huge amount of time, but when you consider that FNaF as a franchise was already on its 4th game 11 months in, it starts to put things into perspective. To give a comparison, more time has passed since the release of Security Breach to now than the release of FNaF 1 to FNaF 3. Time was very sensitive in the early days, so piecing these events down to the specifics is very important. Anyways, this map, for the time, is still absolutely solid. Some details are down to a T, and considering that this map was made in less than 16 days, it makes the whole thing even more impressive. This map would be used in so many things back in the day. Very early FNaF SFMs featured this map a ton, as well as countless of Gmod roleplay and sandbox game sessions happening back in the day. Oh, and did I mention that this map is actually playable too? And it being fully 3D at the time was absolutely huge. I think this may have been the first time FNaF was properly translated into a 3D environment too, so there's really no wonder why this map was massive back in the day. You could probably even make the argument that this map, along with the videos that were made on it, are not only what boosted the popularity of FNaF, but also Gmod. Let me give an example. Undeniably, the most popular Garry's Mod YouTubers at the time were FNaF Gaming and Venturian Tale. Controversies surrounding these groups aside, FNaF Gaming's Gmod FNaF Sandbox video would amass over 50 million views alone, being the 5th most viewed video on the entire channel. Venturian Tale would also have their most popular videos on the channel be FNaF related 5 times in a row, their most popular video amassing a very respectable 17 million views. And what do you know, they were both playing on this map, albeit a much more dated version of it. The map actually got updated in 2015, as it states on the Steam page. We can see glimpses of the old version of the map though through these videos, which had some weird design choices to it, such as doors at the beginning of the East and West Hall. Still though, with the major limitations we had regarding the series at the time, the map is still very impressive in many regards. It's one that is seemingly used very frequently today, and is even one of the most subscribed Garry's Mod add-ons of all time. To say Garry's Mod had an impact on FNaF would be an understatement. More Gmod FNaF content would be made monthly after this, with several new maps, character models, NPCs, and even playable animatronics starting to become something that would be all added to the game as time went on. Needless to say, FNaF and Source's relationship may be strong, but the relationship it has with Garry's Mod in particular is a pairing that is borderline perfect. But now that we have established that, why exactly? Talking about the loneliness and the isolation the Source engine brings is a topic that has been done into the ground. I'd wager most of you have seen content regarding this topic at least once in the past. To put it briefly, Source was an engine created for dystopian settings. Half-Life 2 and Portal are key examples of this, and it's why many areas of those games feel incredibly off to the player. Garry's Mod, a game built off the bones of Half-Life 2 particularly, makes great work of horror settings because of it. Half-Life 2 isn't necessarily a horror game itself, but it surely can build a horror atmosphere when needed. The same feeling can be felt in other games like Portal and even Counter-Strike or TF2 to an extent. Unpopulated Source maps capture this the most, and this is why I believe Five Nights at Freddy's fits perfectly with the feel of the Source engine. Despite what later games in the series may be doing, the initial appeal of Five Nights at Freddy's was its incredibly eerie atmosphere. Being stuck in this dingy pizzeria with minimal ways to defend yourself against the threats just outside your office. The fear coming from the claustrophobia and total isolation from anything human. Being stuck with these 4 lifeless looking robots until your shift ends. The isolation from the Source engine I think heightens this feeling on occasion. You already feel alone, so your threats now being these unpredictable, deceiving robots rather than militarized aliens or zombies somewhat heightens the fear the engine can give off. I'd imagine it did in 2014 at least. Even if people didn't notice it at the time, I do believe this is a big contributor on what is keeping FNaF so alive in the Source community. Even at a time where you could start making the same content in objectively superior engines and software such as Blender and Unreal Engine 5, there is still a huge dedicated community that is still sticking around Source. It's a program still very hands-off and somewhat accessible to anyone, but that added bonus of being made to fit a similar atmosphere of FNaF is a big reason as to why I personally believe FNaF and Source have as good of a bond as it does today.
But have you considered that FNaF may have gotten too big in the Source community?
Huh? What do you mean by that?
Think about it. How many SFM animations and workshop add-ons are out there that exist as nothing more than mere fodder? Saves and dupes for Garry's Mod that don't contribute anything and clog up the workshop. A migration of children to these corners that contributed to the oversaturation of content for these games and programs. I think it's something to consider when discussing this topic.
Honestly, I didn't even think about that until now. But even so, I feel a lot of the things I brought up outweigh the few negatives the association the two have bring.
The wider Source and Gmod community seem to disagree. Many creators and community members credit FNaF for ruining Gmod.
That seems a bit extreme. It kind of feels like a scapegoat for what may be a more complex issue. What do you personally think?
That's a question I've had for a while now myself. I think it needs a more thorough analysis to unravel. With what I've gathered so far, I think it's time to answer the question. Did FNaF ruin Garry's mod?
I guess I'll have to stick around and find out for myself. In the meantime though, be on the lookout for Richter Overtime's continuation of this video. As for now, this is where I get off. I've been Dags, and until next time, see ya.
Foxy